Let me say something that might feel a little uncomfortable, but also a little relieving at the same time. You've thought about this enough. You've prayed about it. You've journaled about it. You've gone back and forth in your mind. You've looked at it from every angle. You've asked God, what should I do? Is this the right move? Am I hearing you clearly? And yet, you're still in the same place, still unsure, still hesitant, still waiting to feel ready. At some point, we have to be honest. This isn't confusion anymore, it's overthinking. And I want to be clear when I say that. This doesn't mean you're careless. It doesn't mean you're not seeking God. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. In fact, most women who struggle with overthinking are thoughtful, responsible, and spiritually aware. You don't want to get it wrong. You don't want to move ahead of God. You don't want to make a decision you'll regret. So you slow down, you process, you analyze. But somewhere along the way, thinking became a substitute for trusting. And instead of helping you move forward, it keeps you in the same place. Because overthinking, it doesn't just delay decisions, it creates the illusion that you're making progress when you're actually standing still. So today, I don't want to give you more to think about. I don't need you overthinking anymore. I want to help you recognize when thinking has gone too far and what it looks like to move forward without needing to have everything figured out. So, overthinking, it doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like responsibility. It sounds like, I just want to be sure. I don't want to move the wrong way. Let me think about this a little more. I just need more clarity. And on the surface, that sounds wise. That sounds like someone who is, trying to be intentional, trying to be prayerful, trying to be careful. But let's look at this a little bit closer. Overthinking it often shows up as, revisiting the same decision over and over without actually moving forward, playing out every possible outcome in your mind so you can avoid getting it wrong. Okay, guilty. This is me. Okay, I'm talking about me. Or you're waiting until you're completely confident to take a step. Kind of guilty again, y'all. Okay. Or you're asking for confirmation, then asking for more confirmation, and then one more just to be sure. It looks like knowing what's in front of you, but feeling unable to act on it. Not because you don't see anything, but because you see too many possibilities. And instead of bringing peace, it creates pressure because now every decision feels heavy. Every option feels like it carries too much weight. And you start telling yourself, what if I choose wrong? What if I mess this up? What if I hear God incorrectly? So you stay in analysis, you stay in reflection, you stay in preparation, but you don't move. And here's the part that is easy to miss. Overthinking can feel productive because you're engaged, you're processing, you're thinking deeply. It doesn't feel like avoidance, it feels like progress. But if nothing is changing, if no steps are being taken, if you're still in the same place weeks or months later, then it's not progress. It's delay. And it's not God delaying, that's you. Okay. Sorry to put it harshly, but that's you overthinking. And it's not because you're incapable, but because you've convinced yourself that you need more clarity than God is actually requiring. And here why this is so hard to recognize. Overthinking doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like wisdom. It feels like maturity. It feels like you're being responsible with your life, especially as a woman in your 30s or 40s, like myself. You're trying not to be impulsive. You're trying not to be reckless. You don't have time to make mistakes, right? So you're trying to make emotional decisions. You're trying to get it right. You're trying to make a decision that you won't regret. And you're also trying to hear God clearly and move at the right time. So you think more, you weigh your options, you consider outcomes, you slow yourself down. And again, none of that is wrong. But here is where the shift happens. At some point, thinking stops being discernment and starts becoming self protection. Not protection from danger, protection from discomfort, from risk, from being seen, from getting it wrong, from having to trust without full understanding. And when that happens, overthinking becomes a way to stay in control Because as long as you're thinking, you don't have to act. It's a safety net. As long as you're processing, you don't have to step out. As long as you're analyzing, you don't have to risk anything yet. Right? It's like going to school when you're in college. Like, what do you do? Oh, I'm in school. So it's not, that pressure though, me getting out there and working and making money. It's like I'm in school, it's safe. I'm in school, I'm thinking and analyzing, not doing, I'm just soaking it in right now. I'm not acting. So it's very similar to that. Right. And the truth is, for many women, the issue is not that God hasn't spoken. It's that what he said requires trust. And trust feels more vulnerable than thinking. Proverbs tells us that to trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not on our own understanding. But overthinking is exactly that, leaning on your own understanding, trying to make everything make sense before you move, trying to feel certain before you obey. And if we're being honest, some of you are not waiting on clarity, you're waiting on certainty. And God rarely gives certainty in advance. He gives direction, he gives steps, he gives enough, and then he watches what we do with it. So overthinking, it feels wise because it sounds like discernment. But if it keeps you stuck, it's not discernment anymore. It's delay. And the Bible doesn't just show us faith, it shows us what happens when we move away from simple and trust into to simple trust and into over processing. So let's look at a few moments here. So in 1 Kings chapter 17, God tells Elijah to go to a widow in Zarephath. And when Elijah arrives, the widow says that she only has enough food left for one final meal before she and her son dies. Now think about that. If she had sat there and tried to fully process what Elijah was asking, it wouldn't have made sense. Give away your last portion? Trust a stranger? Expect provision later? There was no logical framework for that. But she responded in obedience, and provision followed, not before, but after. Then look at the disciples in Luke chapter 5. Jesus tells them to cast their nets again after they had already worked all night and caught nothing. From a logical standpoint, it didn't add up, right? What's the saying now? The math ain't mapping. So they were experienced fishermen. They had already assessed the situation. But Peter says something simple. Because you say so, I will let down the nets. Not because it made sense, not because he felt certain, but because he chose to trust. And that's where the breakthrough came. We need to say that more often, because you said so. Woo. Just like your parents tell you as a child, right? Just because they knew better. So the father is the same way. So now contrast that with Saul in 1 Samuel 13. He was given clear instruction to wait for Samuel. But when things didn't unfold the way he expected, when time stretched, pressure increased, and like that happens in our lives, right? And people began to scatter, he started thinking, processing, evaluating the situation. And instead of trusting the instruction that he had already been given, he took matters into his own hands and he overrode obedience with reasoning. And it cost him. The difference in all of these moments is not intelligence, it's posture. The widow didn't have all the answers. Peter didn't have the full clarity. Saul didn't lack understanding, but the outcome was determined by trust. Overthinking says, let me make sure this makes sense before I move. Trust says, I don't have full clarity, but I'm willing to take the next step. And this is where many women get stuck because you're not lacking wisdom. You're just trying to apply it in a way that removes the need for trust. I know it's harsh to say that because you're thinking in your mind, well, I'm not doing that. When you're overthinking, that's how it appears. That's how it shows up, as a lack of trust. But that's not how God leads. He gives you enough for the next step, and then he invites you to follow. So let's talk about what this is really doing, not in theory, but in your actual life. Because overthinking, it doesn't just keep you thinking, it costs you something. It costs you in delay, not because you don't care, not because you're not capable, but because you keep revisiting the same place instead of moving forward from it. So weeks pass, months pass, and you're still trying to feel sure. It disconnects you from peace because when your mind is constantly, turning, you can't rest. Even when nothing is happening externally, you feel internally exhausted. You're carrying decisions that you haven't even made yet. You're trying to solve outcomes that you don't have the authority to control, and it drains you. And it also makes simple things feel complicated. So, what started as a clear nudge becomes a long internal conversation. You question it, you break it down, you look for alternatives until something that was a lot simple feels heavy and unclear. And then you start second guessing yourself, even the things that you were once confident about, even the patterns that you've already seen, even the direction that felt familiar. You begin to doubt your ability to hear God, your ability to discern, your ability to move forward. And slowly, without realizing it, you shrink, not because you've lost capacity, but because you've lost trust in what you already know. And this is where I want to gently connect this back to what we've been talking about. So, in the last video, we talked about patterns. You've already seen things in your life that are consistent. You've already recognized themes, but instead of trusting what's been revealed, you're analyzing it, revisiting it, trying to make it make perfect sense. And that's where overthinking keeps you stuck. Not because nothing is there, not because you keep standing over it instead of stepping into it. Now I'm going to share something personally, right? So I shared in the last video that I'm currently going through a transition and haven't got to the other side of it yet. And, I'll share what that transition is in due time when the Lord says so. But in my overthinking and relying on my logic, I've tried multiple approaches to move this thing forward and ended up exhausted and frustrated, and nothing had been working. And my overthinking is what, led me to trying multiple approaches in the first place. And, God was like, just rest, Lisa. I got this. So now I have peace about where things are, and I know that God is working it out. I'm confident in that. And I share that to say that overthinking doesn't protect you or move things along quicker. It prolongs the process, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're trying to carry something that was never meant to be managed that way. So if overthinking is what's been keeping you stuck, then what do you actually do instead? Not in theory, practically. And I want to keep this very simple because the goal is to not replace overthinking with overcomplicating. They don't need that, right? And so it's to return what's already cleared. So that's the next step. I'll repeat that. So what's the next step? It's to return to what's already clear. So first, come back to what you already know. Not everything, just what's clear. There are things that God has already shown you, things you already recognize, patterns you've already seen, steps that have already come to mind. You don't need a brand new revelation. You need to honor the one you already have. Second, take the next step, not the full plan. Overthinking wants the whole picture, but God often gives direction one step at a time. Psalms 119 says that his word is a lamp to our feet, not a floodlight for the entire path, just enough to see where to place your foot next. So instead of asking, what is the full plan for my life? Ask, what is the right next step in front of me? And take it. Third, release the outcome. This is where the trust comes in, because a lot of overthinking is really about control. You want to make sure it works. You want to make sure it's right. You want to make sure you don't waste time. But obedience is your responsibility. Outcome is God's. And when you release the outcome, you free yourself to move. So fourth, you pay attention to peace, not pressure, not urgency, not fear disguised as responsibility. Peace. Colossians says to let the peace of God rule. The word rule means to govern, to make the call. Peace doesn't always mean easy, but it does mean steady. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't pressure you. It settles you to move forward without panic. Peace is a sign that you trust God. So you can say it with your lips, but the anxiety is high, right? The anxiety is still high. And so, for example, if your boss says that they trust you, but they're always looking over your shoulder, micromanaging, completing the work themselves because they don't trust you to do it, calling you every 5 minutes, that's a sign that they don't trust you. Or when they are relaxed and they're not micromanaging and they let you be, that's a sign that trust is there. So the same thing works with God. So again, peace is a sign that you trust God. All right, that's what he's looking for. That surrendered heart, that peace, that comfort, That's how God knows, okay, yes, they're not just saying it, they truly trust me. And finally, give yourself permission to move without having everything figured out. You're not behind, you're not unqualified, and you're not waiting because God is withholding. You've just been trying to figure and think things out in your own way when God has been inviting you into trust. So if you take nothing else from this video, take this. You don't need to think about it more. You don't need another angle. You don't need one more confirmation. You don't need to keep going in circles trying to feel sure. At some point, the shift is not in your thinking, it's in your trust. Because overthinking will keep you in a place that feels productive, but produces nothing. And that's where many women stay longer than they need to. Not because they don't love God, not because they're not trying, but because they're trying to carry clarity in a way that God never asked them to. You were never meant to figure everything out. You were meant to follow step by step with what's already been shown without needing to control what hasn't. And if you're listening to this and thinking, I see it, but I still feel stuck, you might want to check out my free training. It's called Waiting Well, the 3 belief shifts that move you out of delay and into divine delivery. Because for many women, the issue is not that God hasn't spoken. It's that we're holding on to beliefs that make it hard to trust what he's already said. And so in that training, I'll walk you through the shifts that help you move from overthinking to trusting, from delay to movement, and from pressure to peace. So if you're ready for that, you can find the link below and take that when you're ready. And before you go, I want you to sit with this. What have I already seen that I've been overthinking? Not what's unclear, what's already clear. So start there. You don't need to rush, but you do need to move. I'll see you in the next one, Royal Ones.